Good afternoon. My name is Barry Bishop, President of Virginians for High-Speed Rail. On behalf of our board, welcome to today's virtual town hall meeting. We have over 300 people joining us today to learn more about the impact of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act on America's rail network. The purpose of our virtual town hall series is to give Virginians an opportunity to hear from and engage with the leading transportation decision makers and thinkers in the Commonwealth and nation today. Our town hall series is made possible at no cost to participants through the generous support of our program sponsor, WSP, and our supporting sponsor, Washington, D.C. South Carmel's Church Station. We thank them for their support. One bit of housekeeping, please send your questions via the chat box to our Executive Director, Danny Plugger, who will address them to our speaker today. Today's town hall will also be posted on YouTube sometime next week, and we encourage you to share the link to it with your colleagues. For those of you not familiar with Virginians for High-Speed Rail, we were founded in the 1990s by business leaders in Richmond and Hampton Roads to advocate for expansion of passenger rail in the Commonwealth and to build grassroots support for the Southeast High-Speed Rail Corridor connecting Washington, D.C. to Virginia, North Carolina, and Point South. Since VHSR was founded, Virginia's Amtrak trains have launched 32.7 million trips, generated over 11.6 billion in economic benefits, removed 12.5 billion passenger miles from our roads, reduced fuel consumption by 164 million gallons, eliminated the release of nearly 1.5 million metric tons of CO2 pollution, and saved the taxpayers over 143 million in roadway maintenance costs. Virginia's Amtrak trains are on pace this year to exceed 1.8 million in annual passengers for the first time ever. Much of that progress is thanks to the leadership of today's speaker. And here to introduce our speaker and say a few words about our sponsor, WSP, is VHSR Director Oscar Gonzalez, WSP Senior Vice President and Transit and Rail Market Leader for the Capital Area. Oscar?
Oscar, you're on mute.
Never fails, right? Good afternoon, everybody. Great to see you all. Just a couple of things. WSP provides a full range of services in strategic advisory, planning, program management, engineering, construction management, operations and maintenance support. And the QR code that Danny showed earlier, you can get additional information on that. But I just want to get to our speaker right now because Ms. Mitchell has had a hand in many of the passenger rail successes that Virginia has seen. Jennifer Mitchell was appointed as Deputy Administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration in April 2022. In that role, she provides executive leadership and direction on agency operations and policy matters, including the agency's safety and rail development activities. Ms. Mitchell has over 25 years of experience working in the transportation industry in both the public and private sectors. Prior to joining the FRA, she served for 8 years as director of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, becoming the second longest tenured director of the department. Her many accomplishments at DRPT include the landmark agreements between CSX, Norfolk Southern, and Amtrak to significantly expand passenger rail service in the Commonwealth over the next 10 years, as well as advancing construction of the new Long Bridge across the Potomac River. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker, Jennifer Mitchell, Deputy Administrator for the Federal Railroad Administration. Jennifer.
Thank you, Oscar, for the very kind introduction. And I just want to say hello to everybody. It is really great to be here. I wish I could see you all in person, but hopefully we'll get to do that again soon. I also just want to thank Danny, the entire board of VHSR. I've had the opportunity now to work around the country in a number of states and a number of regions, and I really, really appreciate the strength of this group, both the broad constituency that you have, the strong support from the business community, and just the political support that you bring as well. I can say that there's very few states or regions that have the same level of organization and advocacy that this group has. So again, thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be here. I am also accompanied by Ryan Arbuckle of FRA, who hopefully will keep me from getting too far off script, but he's our coordination for all of our bipartisan infrastructure law activities and programs, which is what I am here to talk about today. So just real quick by way of introduction, across the country, I think most people would look at our rail system and say that it needs improvement. We know that our intercity passenger rail system lags behind many of our peer countries. We also know that on the freight side, we're still seeing far too many derailments, almost 1,000 per year, which has been the level for decades. Not to mention all of the consequences to communities that they face because of blocked crossings as well, sometimes for 15, 30, or 90 minutes at a time. So there's a reason we face those challenges, and that's because we have underestimated, America has underinvested in rail for at least half a century. But President Biden is changing that. He's putting the resources from the bipartisan infrastructure law to work to make freight and passenger rail safer, more resilient, and more efficient. So when we look at the state of rail in America, I believe there is going to be a before the infrastructure law and an after the infrastructure law. The after is going to be a lot safer. It's going to have much stronger supply chains, which are going to help keep the cost of goods down. And it's going to give people a great option to take the train when they travel. I will also note that when more people and more freight moves by train, it means less congestion on our roads and less pollution. And I'm sure nobody is against that. So also a few misconceptions about the bipartisan infrastructure law. First of all, it is not just a singularly focused funding stream for a particular rail corridor or project. It is not only focused on high-speed rail. It is not only focused on Amtrak, nor is it just a dedicated funding source for a specific part of the country. We have a lot of different programs that we'll be using and we'll be funding across the country. And I do plan to get into all of those as we go along. So Ryan, next slide. So some of you may have seen this, a little bit about the funding that we have available, 66 billion in advance appropriations, which is a real generational investment in passenger rail. This is 5 years of funding, and it's broken up into a number of different programs. 22 billion of that is for Amtrak, particularly for their system-wide capital program. We have $5 billion in advance appropriations for our Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements, or CRISI program. This is an existing program, but we now have 4 times as much funding than we've ever had before. $3 billion for our Railroad Crossing Elimination Program. This is a new program that we've already awarded 1 year of awards, which I'll talk about later too, but we're very excited about the impact that this program can have on communities. 36 billion for our federal state partnership program. This is divided between the Northeast Corridor and the national network as well. And then 250 million for our restoration and enhancement program, which primarily funds operating activities for the restoration of passenger rail corridors. Next. Again, a little bit about the buckets of funding that we have here. CRISI is our program that is designed to really improve safety and efficiency of the network. We can use that for both passenger and freight rail projects. With the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, it's really designed to support highway and rail grade crossings, whether to eliminate existing crossings or to improve those. Again, $3 billion for that program as well. Our Corridor ID program is the program that we're using to establish our pipeline of projects. We're going to select corridors there, and we'll be using that for conducting service planning and advancing projects to the next stage of project development as well. And we can use up to 5% of our Fed state partnership program for that. Our federal state partnership program, as I mentioned before, is divided between the Northeast Corridor and our non-Northeast Corridor or national network. That's designed to improve the performance of existing corridors, to expand or establish new corridors, and to reduce the stated good repair backlog. And finally, our restoration and enhancement program, providing operating assistance to intercity passenger rail service as well. So next slide. This is a little bit about the way that our programs are coming together and how they relate to the project life cycle process. So when you start with systems planning, that really involves our regional rail plans and state rail plans. And then moving into the corridor ID program is where we plan to support project planning and project development activities, including PE, or PE and NEPA would be separate from that as well, but we would support the project planning through the corridor ID program. Our Fed State, CRISI, and railroad crossing elimination programs can be used for project development, final design, or construction, but we are primarily focusing those on final design and construction activities. And then our R&E program, restoration and enhancement, can be used for operations as well. The next slide. And we'll get you a copy of this later, but if you are interested in learning more about the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have a lot of information on our website there with a ton of resources, including information that's specific to our discretionary grant programs. Next. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our CRISI program. We were very pleased to be able to make announcements for that last week. So we were able to fund, we were delighted to announce $1.4 billion in funding going to 70 different rail projects in 35 different states. And again, these awards are 4 times bigger than any previous rounds of funding that we've had under the CRISI program. And we know there's going to be more coming very soon too. We were able to announce these. A few of the passenger rail investments are pictured here. I'll go into detail about those in a moment, but just a few examples of the types of projects that we're supporting with this round of funding. In Nebraska, we're helping to modernize a regional freight line that is outdated and in poor condition, which is going to make operations more efficient. And then in Tennessee, we're upgrading about 40 bridges along 10 short line railroads that need immediate repair. And in Ohio, we're helping to rehabilitate rail bridges and tracks, improving safety and capacity along a railroad that carries chemicals and hazardous materials. And then last week, I was in Washington State, where I was pleased to announce a $72.8 million grant to the Washington State DOT for their rural rail rehabilitation phase 2 project, which is going to fund infrastructure enhancements on the Palouse River and Coulee City Railroad, which serves a critical part of the wheat supply chain in eastern Washington. So next, I want to focus on some of the passenger rail projects that are being funded out of that program as well. The next project that probably many of you are very familiar with here in Virginia, the Franconia-Springfield Bypass Project, received a grant of $100 million. This is a key component of the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. It involves the final design and construction of a crossover on the RF&P corridor between Washington, D.C. and Richmond. Again, very critical corridor connecting the Northeast and the Southeast corridors. Very busy corridor, and as we know, the state, being led by the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, will be constructing that along with a number of other improvements that will add intercity passenger rail trains to this corridor. Next, the Gulf Coast Improvement Project. Many of you may have heard about this because it was the subject of a Surface Transportation Board proceeding between Amtrak and the host railroads of CSX and Norfolk Southern. We're very pleased to be able to provide it with a grant through CRISI for $178 million, which will allow us to establish new service there. We'll also be constructing a number of improvements on the CSX and NS lines between New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama. It will help facilitate 2 round trips a day while also mitigating impacts to freight operations. And we hope to see that line be operational sometime next year. The next. We were also able to provide funding to California High-Speed Rail Authority, close close to $202 million there for 6 interchange projects. These are actually part of the broader California high-speed rail project. But these particular grade crossings will actually be providing some benefits as well to BNSF, which is the corridor that parallels California high-speed rail, going to remove 7 at-grade crossings and converting them to grade-separated crossings, and also closing a crossing in a rural disadvantaged community in the Central Valley as well. So significant safety benefits for that project. Next. And then another project that we're very happy to fund in Massachusetts, which is connecting the Commonwealth. This is going to be the first phase of future intercity passenger rail service between Boston and Springfield to Albany. This is going to provide both funding for project development, design, and construction along the corridor, which is also part of CSX's corridor, and also infrastructure owned by Massachusetts DOT as well. We expect that it's going to improve service performance and provide 2 additional daily round trips for Amtrak's Lakeshore limited service at higher speeds. And again, very safety benefits as well as rail transformation benefits too. Next. And a couple other projects that we're very happy to highlight. Chrissy is a place where we can fund workforce development programs, which has been a very big focus of this administration's. We understand that in order to have the rail workforce we need for the future to support all of these projects, to also be able to provide good succession planning, we need to have more workforce development programs. And so this is a key area that our Chrissy project is very keen to support. One of these is a program that we have, or a project that we'll be funding with Amtrak for more engineering track foremen. It's a workforce development apprenticeship program as well. The training center is located in Pennsylvania, but will have impacts throughout the entire Amtrak system. Another goal of the Chrissy program is to help reconnect communities and help mitigate the impacts of that rail has had on dividing communities for a long time as well. So the city of Birmingham has a project that they've worked on with Norfolk Southern. And in this project, the redesign program to reduce extended delays, enhance safety, and invest in growing neighborhoods program. So this is going to be PE activities along 2 segments of Norfolk Southern's line. It include grade crossing improvements, closing some crossings, and efforts to help improve community safety as well, and in an area that is primarily disadvantaged and has been impacted for many years by the NS network here. Next. Another workforce development project that we have is with the University of South Florida. This is a project that they're working on with a number of other universities across the country, as well as the Transportation Technology Center, which is co-sponsored by FRA as well. But this is going to provide funding for a number of different programs that are targeted to replacing the aging workforce, improving or reducing skill gaps, and trying to stabilize and grow our rail industry workforce as well. So very pleased to support that, and with a number of universities that are part of that program too. And then Chrissy is also a program where we are able to fund locomotive replacement, particularly for more environmentally friendly technologies. One example of that is here in the Mid-Atlantic with the Maryland Department of Transportation. We'll be funding 3 locomotive replacements serving the Port of Baltimore in Maryland with CSX transportation as well. So this is going to have significant impacts benefiting both port employees, but also emissions reduction in the neighborhoods surrounding the port as well. The next. Next, I'm going to go to our railroad crossing elimination program. Let's see, we were able, next slide. Just a highlight of the distribution of projects around the country. We were able to fund 63 projects for totaling $571 million across 32 states. And that was out of a pool of 153 eligible applications. So all of these programs are, even with the increased funding levels that we have, are still extremely competitive as well. As you can see, we were able to fund projects from Texas to South Carolina, and a number of great benefits there. Next slide. Going back. So the city of Houston was a recipient of one of the largest grants that we have there, for the West Belt Improvement Program. And I know that I had the opportunity to go out there and visit this part of the city of Houston, and as had Administrator Bose several times as well. And this is a community that is literally surrounded by in a triangle of railroads, and the railroad blocked crossings has significant impacts on this community. It is a place where we have a number of lines all converging in the city of Houston, and where a number of the major east-west main lines go as well. So this is going to support project development, final design, and construction of a new sealed corridor along the Houston Belt and Terminal Railroad. It includes a 9,000-foot sealed corridor, construction of 4 underpasses, and closing 3 at-grade crossings. So project that we know is going to have very significant impacts for this community too. In Los Angeles County, we had a project with the Sierra Highway Crossing Elimination Planning Project. Eventually with construction, this is going to eliminate 3 grade crossings there. I think we lost our slides for a second.
Yeah, sorry, Jennifer, I don't know what happened. I'm getting them back up.
Okay, no worries. But again, this LA County project is will eventually be eliminating grade crossings, providing much more safety improvements there. And let's see, we'll give Ryan a second to get those back up. Okay. I'll keep talking while Ryan's getting our slides up. There were 2 other projects that I wanted to highlight. One of those is with Broward County, Florida. Many of you have probably read about some of the safety impacts along the Florida East Coast Railroad and Brightline corridor, where we do have higher speed rail between Miami and now West Palm and Orlando. We have been funding a number of grade crossing improvements there and safety programs, including a pretty big grant out of our railroad crossing elimination program, which is going to Broward County. And that is going to fund a number of programs. It's up to $15.4 million, and it's going to support new exit gates and medians at 21 different grade crossings along the Florida East Coast Rail line. And the next one that I was going to highlight is also with the city of Hammond, Indiana, the Governor's Parkway Railroad Overpass project. I'll give Ryan a second to catch up to that. But this is going to eliminate 2 grade crossings on Norfolk Southern system. And this is in an area that has been profiled in a number of places about having, there's a school right on the other side of this, this corridor here. And we've had significant impacts on the neighborhoods, and particularly children being able to access the school. So this project is going to eliminate some of those grade crossings and provide a pedestrian access as well along this alignment too. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, next slide. And now I'm going to transition over to passenger rail programs with our corridor ID program. And this is where we, again, are really going to be laying the foundation for our long-term rail program, building the pipeline of projects, because we haven't had a long-term stable source of funding for rail capital projects. We really haven't had the opportunity to build up that pipeline of projects across the country. which we really need in order to bring our rail system up to a world-class standard and make it our rail system cleaner and more equitable across the country. So the Corridor ID program is our way of identifying new corridors that can be improved. These will provide also a framework for preference for future funding in our federal state program too. So within this program, we're going to be selecting corridors for development and then partnering with project sponsors to prepare service development plans as well. The next slide. We had we're doing this in a multi-step process. We established this program back in May 13th of 2022, conducted a lot of extensive outreach. We did publish our notice of corridor solicitation back in December of 2022. Did provide an interim report to Congress as well in this May. Next slide. So we are now in the process of reviewing those applications. We expect to be announcing those later this fall. And those projects will then move forward to complete what we're calling step 1 and step 2 of the Corridor ID program. And we are going to be reporting on this again to Congress in February of next year. Next slide. And we did an expressions of interest to be able to identify corridors that would potentially be entering into the program. We received expressions of interest related to 28 existing corridors, 13 extensions. Many of those were from states and some of those were from other regional entities as well, and 70 new corridors. 41 of those were from states and 29 from other entities. We did open up the Corridor ID program to a pretty broad range of potential applicants, including tribal governments, localities, and regional governments as well. So as you can see here on the map, it's a pretty broad network of projects. There is some overlap with our long distance study as well. But these are all, again, shorter distance routes that we see being developed with states, with regional agencies as well, and with potentially Amtrak or other operators throughout the project development process. Next slide. And then that leads us into our Fed State Partnership Program. Again, as I mentioned before, this is divided up between our Northeast Corridor and our non-Northeast Corridor or national program, as we're calling it. We are currently reviewing applications for the national program, and the total amount of funding we'll be making available for awards is $4.5 billion. We also have the ability to enter into phased funding agreements, which is multi-year funding commitments for future funding from advanced appropriations as well. This is the new tool that FRA hasn't had available in the past, but it is something that we expect to use to be able to make long-term commitments for some of these major projects. On the Fed State Northeast Corridor program, the total amount of funding that we have is just under $9 billion. Again, we have the opportunity there to fund multi-year programs. We're using a Northeast Corridor inventory, which we released in October of last year, to also define the buckets of projects that we'll be funding out of that, primarily targeted for state of good repair projects, primarily on some of the major bridges and tunnels as well. But we do also have some service improvements, speed improvements, and capacity expansion in the NEC as part of that program too. Next slide. And again, the types of projects that are eligible is a pretty broad range. It can include everything from state of good repair projects to expansion or performance improvement as well. Planning and environmental studies is also eligible, as well as project development and final design and construction. Again, a pretty broad range of eligible recipients here. States, groups of states, or a lot of public entities or tribal governments. What you don't see here is any of the class 1 or short line railroads are not eligible recipients. So for projects that would have funding that would potentially go to a host railroad, they'd need to partner with a state or regional entity to be able to be eligible for funding under that program as well. So next. And a little bit about our calendar going forward. This last item here. We have a we've had a very busy past year. And I do also want to just emphasize as well that FRA has been growing our staff significantly to help implement all of these programs. I think we are now over 1,000 employees total. And I believe we've hired close to 150 employees in our railroad development group, which is the group that manages and oversees these programs too. So we will be continuing to bring people on because this is a big implementation effort, and both getting these programs put together, getting our notices of funding opportunity out, and then getting funding obligated to sponsors as well. So as you can see, we started back in December 2022 is when we announced a number of our notices of funding opportunity, or NOFOs. We also announced our Interstate Rail Compact NOFO in April of this year. We've also begun announcing awards. In June, we announced our Railroad Crossing Elimination Program. We did just announce our CRISI program, as I mentioned before. Very soon, we will be making announcements for our Fed State NEC grants. And later this year, we'll be making announcements both for our Fed State National Program, the Interstate Rail Compacts Program, and our Corridor ID program as well. Next slide. And then moving on to 2024, we are early in the year. We expect to see our NOFO out for the next round of CRISI. We've already announced that we plan to combine both FY23 and FY24 funding. So we'll have approximately $3.2 billion in funding that we'll be allocating through that call for projects. So we're definitely encouraging people to apply for CRISI in the next round as well. Our NOFOs for the next round of our Fed State program will be coming out in the spring of next year, and then also next year's Interstate Rail Compacts program too. We expect to start making announcements for RCE in June, in the summer of next year, late summer for CRISI, and again in the fall of next year for our Fed State programs too. And I think that that is it for our slides. Yep. My contact information. I know Danny knows how to reach out to me, but I am happy to take some questions now as well. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for the incredible information, and obviously for the fantastic Franconia Springfield grant. I think that, if I remember correctly, might be Virginia's largest federal rail grant that we've received. I know it's, if not the largest, it's definitely probably the second. So incredibly exciting. A somewhat simple question regarding the federal-state partnership. Is the DC to Richmond corridor considered part of the Northeast or not part of the Northeast?
It is not considered part of the Northeast. Yeah, the Northeast corridor ends at essentially Union Station.
Okay, that's good to know. And then there was just a follow-up in the chat box. What's the difference between the corridor ID expressions of interest for track route and conceptual categories?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Sorry.
What is the difference between corridor ID expressions of interest for track route or in conceptual categories? I guess there's multiple categories.
Yeah, and for the expression of that was actually something I believe we asked the applicants to self-identify where they fell in that range, I guess, of project development as well. So again, that was the expressions of interest. That was really what we were using as our way to identify the universe of projects that are out there. But then we had a separate solicitation for I guess awards that we're evaluating right now. And those, as I mentioned before, should be coming out later this fall.
And I think I know a really cool project in Virginia that goes east to west, that hopefully will be selected or in the pipeline. What
Yeah.
should communities, states, corridors do to make their future applications and requests successful, besides founding their own Virginians for high-speed rail? That was a big one that we got, was just, how do they, I think a lot of folks are a little bit late to the game. Virginia, under your leadership, really kind of put us to the forefront, and we're reaping the benefits of that, but they want to know what the lessons learned are.
Sure. There are a couple things, observations that I would have from being involved in this on this side for now. And this sounds very simple, but believe it or not, it's a lot harder than one would think, but it's actually to fill out the application correctly. It's really unfortunate, but because we have so many programs that have differing requirements, and a lot of times those requirements are defined by statute, so they're not things that we necessarily come up with. But we, and sometimes, some of our programs require a benefit cost analysis, some of them don't. But we unfortunately get a staggeringly large number of ineligible applications every year. So that's number one, is to take advantage of all of the training that we offer, all of the technical assistance webinars that Ryan and his team put out. There's a lot of really, really good information. I'd say as well that the letters of support that we receive are actually very helpful as well. It's always good for us to have a good understanding of whether the federal matches or the non-federal match is available, whether or not there is strong support within your governor, your state legislature as well, your congressional delegation. So those are always very helpful for us to be able to gauge, and that in some ways is a real indicator of success. Probably the biggest thing though is readiness. Having where environmental work is required, having that either underway or completed is very, very important, or at least at a minimum, having a class of action defined, and having already been working with your FRA contacts on that, both as well as not just environmental readiness, but also project definition, any engineering that's been completed. Agreements with the host railroads is also a huge indicator of success. At a minimum, we want to see that sponsors are coordinating with the project with host railroads. It's unfortunate that we sometimes receive applications where the applicant has not even been talking with the host railroad, and the host railroad is surprised to see things. And so we know that that coordination is really, really difficult, and it's difficult to necessarily line up financial commitments from a host railroad. But at a minimum, we want to see that coordination has been occurring. But if there is an agreement from the host railroads, that's huge as well. So I guess those are a few things that are really helpful in making applications more competitive.
And that kind of leads into a little bit, and it's a question I asked last year, and from the outside in, it looks like y'all are doing a really good job, but it's just kind of the lessons learned from the ERA funds from 2009. That was a huge opportunity. I know a lot of us were excited about it. It kind of flamed out, and it seems like there's definitely been, from the outside looking at FRA, a more concerted effort to take those lessons learned and kind of make investments that actually make a difference.
Yeah, it's funny. That's actually something we talk about quite a lot, is those lessons learned from the ARA program. I wasn't there during ARA, but I can tell you at least what, the types of things that we are talking about is, first of all, being able to obligate money quickly and getting it out the door. We hear all the time that it's so important for us to be able to demonstrate results. And being able to actually get projects underway, under construction. During ARA, there was a big focus on projects that were you know,
Ready.
shovel ready.
Yeah.
And which, you know, and ARA had some deadlines there, which I think in some ways did create some sort of weird decision making, because because of those kind of arbitrary timeframes that were in there. So I think that the intent was good, to get money working and to have that money going to projects and actually going to workers, creating jobs. We don't have that necessarily with the bill programs, which is good that we don't have that constraint of those time limits. But by the same token, we still want to see projects that are going to be ready to go, because we know we need to demonstrate success. We have 5 years of funding, and in order to be able to make the case for more funding in the future, we know that we need to have those funds obligated and in the hands of our grantees, but we also need to demonstrate that we've got projects under construction. There's a lot of discussion as well about how to best allocate funds. Should we be spreading the money around to a lot of different projects, a lot of different districts, or really investing in a few projects? And I think that tension is always going to be there. We're trying to thread that needle to have some big projects. We've said publicly we want to have 3 to 5 major corridors funded and underway as a result of these projects. But we also know that our Fed State program is going to be key to creating that pipeline of future projects that we can potentially fund out of the next 5 years of funding.
And kind of building off that, I know while it's not as sexy as high-speed rail or a lot of other things, the corridor at-grade crossing program, the elimination program is vitally important. It seems like there's just more kind of interaction between automobiles and trains than I think anyone would prefer. How does that kind of lead into what the FRA is doing to improve safety and in some regards also on-time performance? That seems to be an issue that we're facing as well.
Yeah, on the grade crossing safety has really been a big emphasis of ours over the past 2 years. We unfortunately have seen some increases in grade crossing accidents, and sadly, a lot of that has to do with trespasser activities, which we've also seen in a number of urban areas that where we're seeing homeless encampments and people living and spending time just too close to the tracks as well. But we are really placing a very big emphasis on trying to fund grade crossing improvements and safety improvements out of our RCE program, but also out of CRISI where we can too. It was great to see that we had $570 million that we could allocate from our RCE program this year, but we were also extremely oversubscribed. And we know that there's a lot of demand out there from communities for being able to have grade separation and make safety improvements there too. So we're excited about this program. We're excited about the projects we were able to fund. We are encouraging people to come talk to us if you have questions, and work with your state DOTs as well on that, and the host railroads, obviously, because there's big benefits both from a safety standpoint, but a freight fluidity standpoint. Where we do have passenger rail, there, potentially also passenger rail benefits, where we're benefiting a host railroad that is carrying Amtrak service. I can tell as well, there's a lot on the on-time performance issue. There is a lot that we are working very closely with Amtrak on, and we do the reporting for, I guess it's quarterly reporting for on-time performance across the system. We are definitely seeing some improvements in some areas, and particularly with some particular host railroads as well, where we're seeing much better on-time performance. And there's still some corridors though that frankly are just well below where they should be. There is Amtrak, as you may know, has filed a request with the Surface Transportation Board to investigate one of those lines in particular. So we're watching that very closely. But we recognize that just providing more transparency of the information is one way to at least try to get to this issue. And also try to work collaboratively with the freight railroads on ways that we can improve on-time performance too.
Kind of building off that a little bit, how will the IIJA impact long-distance passenger rail service? I know y'all are doing a big comprehensive study. How will that kind of flow into the less regional and the more longer?
Yeah, so we are working on our long distance study right now. We'll actually be providing an interim report to Congress in the not too distant future. And I believe we're planning to wrap that up next year. That'll really provide us with a few things. It'll provide us with a blueprint that we can use and that we can use with Amtrak to potentially identify and fund improvements on some of those long distance routes in the future. It will also hopefully really build a case for the need for more funding for long distance routes in the future as well. I know our team has been working very hard to identify some of the top markets that are available. They're looking at it from a very market-driven perspective. They are looking at, I think statutorily, they were also required to look at routes that had been discontinued previously. So they are looking at that as well too, but they are really trying to take it from a market-based perspective of the places where we would expect to see some of the most successful long distance routes, and really trying to plug some of the holes that are out there too. So it's going to provide, again, sort of a guide for future funding in the future, and for where we may be able to target some of our Fed state funding in future rounds for projects that will help enhance long distance service.
And I think one of those is the Daily Cardinal is kind of being looked at as maybe a baseline, which obviously we're very excited about. We would love to see a Daily Cardinal. So there will be, I guess, some investments made for these national trains, because that's one of the things that I've kind of heard is the concerns about a Daily Cardinal and how it may impact the Buckingham branch, specifically in Virginia. And so that's good to hear, because I mean, we want to see that, especially as a train serves a lot of our more rural communities here in the Commonwealth.
Yep. The Daily Cardinal is definitely one that we're looking at. And yes, so, and I know there's a lot of interest in having that too. And I know that it's from, my time in Virginia, I do know how important that train is, and that service is, much like many of the long distance services, but just how important they are to really connecting communities.
They are. And one of the questions we get frequently, obviously, is with electrification, but not necessarily, this question is not electrification, but it's what is the FRA kind of doing on looking at kind of the transition from fossil fuels to zero emission technology, whether it be electrified rail or battery electric or hydrogen? Is there any kind of research or transition efforts being led?
Yeah, we are funding a number of research efforts in that area. And I also at our Transportation Technology Center, which is out in Pueblo, Colorado. We are doing some testing as well of hydrogen vehicles, I believe with Stadler specifically. But that is an area that we're very, very interested in. And as I mentioned before, we can use CRISI for that too. We actually funded a number of projects through CRISI this year that are going to fund Tier 4 locomotives. And I think a total of about 31 new locomotives through this round of CRISI alone, among a number of different project sponsors. But CRISI is the one area we have that we can, where we really can use funding to target that too. And a number of those locomotives, I should say, are going to be also providing service in yards. And we recognize there's a lot of environmental justice issues in where yards are located, and where communities have also grown up around rail yards too. But there is a tremendous amount of emissions impact on those communities too. So that's a place where, we're excited to be able to use Chrissy dollars to replace some of those locomotives with more environmentally friendly technologies.
Thank you. Which program would be most applicable for construction of a new passenger rail station? That was one of the questions we got in the little chat box. Would it be Chrissy?
Yeah, probably. I think Chrissy is one of the most where it would definitely fall in eligibility. I believe it could be eligible under Fed State, but I think that Fed State is really designed more for corridors and more sort of longer, let's say, corridor related capacity improvements. But Chrissy is probably the one place that could really be funded.
And I think that is all the questions that we had that you haven't already answered. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate it as always. And thank you to the FRA for your leadership on this. And I guess my last question will be, how can we help? What can we do to help you and the FRA and continue these great programs? I think we're seeing a lot of investment fruition coming from the seeds that are being planted, and obviously with the funding that is advanced appropriations kind of running out in a few years, how can we help?
I think that certainly advocacy, particularly with members of Congress, is very, very important. And we're lucky, and I know in Virginia we have a very strong congressional delegation with a lot of support from both sides of the aisle for passenger rail, and freight rail as well. But we really that kind of advocacy is very important to be able to make the case for future years of funding. And also, we have advanced appropriations under the bipartisan infrastructure law, but we also have additional appropriations that we could be eligible for. We've seen some small amounts of funding in additional. I think we had about an additional 150 million in Chrissy for this past year, over and above what we had for our advanced appropriations. But I think that having the appropriators hear about the support for additional appropriations is very helpful. So yeah, that type of advocacy is always very helpful. And I know I appreciate as well some of the PR and public, the sort of your team getting the message out on when we do things and when we have. There's good work going on in Virginia. I know you have also been highlighting the ridership increases that we're seeing in Virginia, and being able to see that in at a national level and making sure that that's getting that kind of visibility is really helpful as well. So yeah, keep up the good work. But we do really appreciate all the advocacy that you guys provide.
Absolutely. And thank you, Jennifer. And I think there's a couple other good applications that Virginia has submitted. So hopefully they'll get support, but we appreciate everything. And thank you again for speaking to our audience.
Thank you.
Sure. Briefly before we go, thank you everybody for joining us today for this program. We had over 300 folks RSVP and register. Just as a quick heads up, we have a couple upcoming programs in exactly a month. We have not created a graphic for this yet, but we have Kara, who's Director of Sustainability for Amtrak, and Laura, who's Amtrak's Net Zero Program Manager, to talk about Amtrak and their sustainability of our future trains. And then also for the first time in late November on the 27th, we have the Virginia State of Rail with DJ Stradler, the head of our rail authority here in the Commonwealth, Jennifer's successor, another Jennifer DeBrule, who's our director of DRPT, and Rich Dalton, who's the CEO of the Virginia Railway Express, our commuter rail service. I hope you'll participate in that. And then also, please remember, we have an election in Virginia. Please get out and vote on November 7th. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you, Jennifer and the FRA, for your incredible work and for everything you're doing. Thank you all and have a great Friday.